might make it. I like it. It's cool. But like if I make a coach, I still have to see like I'm just sitting. Okay, let's set it on TV. So it's not like flying spirit. I wanted to be like you. Someone told me. One more. All right, one more.
Good afternoon and welcome to the June Partnership Luncheon entitled Recycling Reimagined, Growing in Today's Economy. We are so incredibly excited that you're here today for what will be such a great presentation. I'd like to introduce to the stage Kevin Fowler. Councilman Fowler, if you would join us for the prayer and the pledge. Yeah.
You're in great danger of getting something silent or something. If you'd bow your head with me. Father, we thank you for this day you've given us, for the week, for this community. We thank you for each person that's here representing their business, caring about this community, about our city. And we just thank you for them and taking time to be here and listening to the presentation today. Father, I ask that you bless this food, use it to nourish us, strengthen us to do your will. Yes, God, this in your name. Amen. If you'd face the flag, stand, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so before we begin with announcements, we're going to throw a little bit of a change up in the agenda. So as you guys may or may not know, the Chamber staff is traveling right now at the Texas Chamber of Commerce Executives meeting. And so the entire staff, with the exception of Samantha, are away at that. And what they're trying to do there is they're actually trying to vie for that conference to come visit us in Rockwall in the year 2020. So that's a very, very exciting opportunity for them. So we thought we would take an opportunity to love on them and encourage them. And so we're going to have a little bit of an activity. I'm going to have Richard introduce it, and then I'm going to be the videographer.
Okay, so on the count of three, here's what we'd like to do. I want everybody, as loud as we can possibly get it, to say, "Bring it home for Rockwall." So before she videos, let's try it one time and see how it sounds. On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Bring it home for Rockwall!
That's
Wow.
very good. That's very good.
Did you happen to catch that?
I didn't, but second time will be better. And then to elongate a little bit, we might need some cheers and woohoos at the very end there. So if you guys could help me out with that, we'll do it this time. Hold on, let me get ready.
Yeah, and so make as much noise as you can after it. And what we're going to do is send this to them so that they can see our support here and how much we appreciate what they're accomplishing. So on the count of three, you ready, Katie? Okay, on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Bring it home for Rockwall! That was awesome. Thank you so much.
It'll be available on CDs next week.
Guys, that was so good. I'm so excited now to send this to them. Pumped now. It's going to be a good luncheon. Okay, so our next order of business is I would like to recognize the elected officials. If you are an elected official, will you please stand so that we can applaud you? Thank you for all that you do. With a community as dynamic as ours and as changing as ours is, you guys are definitely valued assets to us to be those boots on the ground and those ears on the ground for us. So if you are a member at the elite level, will you also stand so that we may recognize you? Will our board of directors please stand so that we can recognize you as well? All right, and some of the most valuable people in the room, if you are a new partner, will you please stand so that we can recognize you and learn who you are so that we can get you connected to all of our great... This is very exciting. All right, do we have any ambassadors in the room. Can you guys stand so that we may recognize you as well? We have a very special ambassador here with us today. If you guys want to meet a chamber advocate, you're definitely going to find that in Stacy. Not only has she previously been employed by the chamber, but she actively and tirelessly serves the chamber through her role as an ambassador. And she is actually this month's ambassador of the month. So will you please come and join us? All right, we've got a couple of announcements that we want to run through before we introduce the speakers. The first one is that Leadership Rockwall 2020 is taking applications. If you guys haven't had an opportunity to participate in this group, I should say, definitely I would encourage you to do so. It is completely life-changing, not only for you as an individual, but also our community. As we think back to all of the projects that have been completed, I just think our community is so much better for them, and we're definitely grateful for their work. So applications are available on the check-in table or online. And then through the sessions, you guys will meet and talk with Rockwall's current leaders, and through panel discussions, presentations, and experiences, explore the area's opportunities, needs, and resources. Leadership Rockwall provides thought-provoking experience focusing on the attributes of the state and what it means to be a leader. Next up, we have Bright Ideas. They are hosted, the next one will be July 26th in the Rockwall Chamber Innovation Room. It is free, but you do need to bring your own lunch, and the panel will be speaking on out-of-the-box marketing. So for you guys in the room who need to think of something different other than flyers and Facebook ads, definitely this would be a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about how to do that outside of the box. We also have Chamber Academy, which is also free, but it includes your lunch, so you don't have to bring your lunch to the Chamber Academy. It'll be July 30th at 12 in the Rockwall Chamber Innovation Room. You want to join the Chamber staff as they walk you through the benefits of value in your Chamber partnership, featuring topics like who's who at the Chamber, how to get involved, member testimonials, maintain your online listing, and this is a perfect class for all new partners or anyone who hasn't been plugged in yet. So all of you guys that stood at the very beginning, we hope to see you on July 30th. The next event that we want to talk about is the Teacher Breakfast. It'll be 7:30 on August 6th. You know, our teachers do such a good job of loving and pouring into our kids, and this is our opportunity to reciprocate that for them. So it's an opportunity to build your brand awareness as well, and a wonderful way to show your appreciation for over the 175 new Rockwall ISD teachers and employees who will be teaching and caring for Rockwall's future leaders. Sponsorships and tickets, are still available. You want to make sure that you contact Miranda or register to get more information on any of the above listed events. But also a great resource is the Chamber calendar, which is on the Chamber website. You can sync those to your calendar so that you've got real-time updates of what's going on at the Chamber. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker sponsor today. There you are, Rick Burness with Republic Services.
Well, thank you everybody for showing up for lunch today. We sure do appreciate the support, and it means a lot to us. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Republic Services a little bit and what our vision is to be America's preferred recycling and waste service provider. We earn this by providing our customers with simple solutions, reliability, and environmental responsibility. This wrapped with a level of service unmatched anywhere in the United States. So a little bit about Republic, just to understand our size. We run about 16,000 trucks a day throughout the United States. We have over 35,000 employees, 14 million customers. Rockwall being the #1 customer, in case anyone was wondering. 240 markets in 40 states. In Texas, we have about 3,800 employees. We support about 8,000 jobs throughout Texas. We run 1,350 routes a day through Texas and have about 1,700 trucks on the street. What's near and dear to my heart and what's great about Republic Services is the community engagement they allow us to provide each day, each week, through the year. We gave over $12 million, of which $6.7 million was in local sponsorships nationwide. And in Rockwall, just so everybody knows, over the years that we've been serviced here, we've given over $30,000 to Rockwall ISD for scholarships, and we tapped over $100,000 in community improvement projects, such as the downtown revitalization, which is awesome. Simply said, we are grateful to have the partnership we have with this city. It's important to us. Obviously, you know, those that know me, it's important to me. I told the mayor one day, and then Mr. Fowler, that I'll be damned if I'll ever let somebody else push their cart out of my garage, because I don't want to do that. I'll have to move. So no, but we chose to live in Rockwall. It's a great community, and we're blessed. And we thank you so much. I would like to introduce some of our team that showed up here today. Jerry Barnett's out of our area in Houston. Robin Moda, Laura Capehart, and Lee Collins. That's all. They're all. Those three young ladies do the same thing I do, and I know I don't want to hear it. You want to change me in, but I don't want that to happen. So, but once again, we are very grateful. And with that, I want to introduce Sylvia Kidd to introduce our guest speaker, chairman of the board with E.B. Holiday. Sylvia.
Well, I am so pleased and so delighted to be able to introduce Mr. Richard Coupland as our keynote speaker. As you know, this is the leadership alumni luncheon as well as our partnership luncheon. So I always like to have a great leader to come in and talk to us at one of these events. So I appreciate your coming. Mr. Coupland's schedule is bar none one of the busiest schedules. As I introduced and mentioned his bio, you will see why. Right after this, he's going to be going to Atlanta. So we're just so pleased that you made the time to be with us. So a little bit about Mr. Coupland. Mr. Coupland joined Republic Services in 2015 as Vice President of Municipal Sales. He currently leads more than 2,400 municipal cities in 40 states and Puerto Rico. His team provides consultative work to their municipal partners to understand and navigate changes in the industry and create durable programs for recycling and waste products. Richard received his Bachelor's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from the Virginia Military Institute and his Master's degree in Business Administration from W.P. Carey School of Business in Arizona State University. Like I said, as you can see, he's awfully busy. We welcome you. We thank you you're here. But I do want to say, right before I say, have you talked, I know this sounds wrong, but Rick Burness also has been a terrific member of our board. He has really worked tirelessly in the community and on our board of directors. He is currently the chair of the RBBA, and they're having an event tonight. And since Richard has been there, since Rick has been there, it has really expanded and has grown, and he has just done a tremendous job. So Republic Services has been a true partner to us, and we're just so happy they are here. So thank you, and if you don't mind, join me in welcoming them.
How y'all doing? Good. Is this on? There we go. Well, I appreciate that introduction, and I really genuinely appreciate the opportunity to share some time and hopefully a little bit of learning with you all today on the recycling industry. Just a couple of other comments before we kick off. We talked a little bit about the size and the scale of Republic Services and the partners that we're able to have around the country. By nightfall tonight, we will have touched 5.1 million homes and commercial customers in a daily logistics dance that never stops. We have to touch those customers. We have to pick up that material, and then tomorrow morning around 2 a.m. our commercial front loaders will roll again with the same job in mind. So it's a fascinating industry because we don't have the luxury of not running. We're really just a national logistics organization. We happen to pick up recyclables and solid waste, but we have to continue to do that day in and day out. We slice up the whole country into 10 areas, kind of loose geography for our whole portfolio. But true to the great state of Texas, you all are your own area. It's just one giant area. And I will say I've been in and out of Texas over the years that I've been in the company, and you can genuinely feel the trust and the relationship that exists between the partnerships and the cities that we serve, like Rockwall, and and our company. Whenever I'm with Rick, he always gives me a whole earful about his passion for Rockwall. And he was talking to me about doing this over a year ago, so I'm glad we can pull it off. And I look forward to kind of sharing with you a little bit of what's been going on in the industry. This topic started about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, with some pretty significant shifts that occurred. But really, some of the problems I'm going to touch on began to present themselves over the past decade. And so this is a problem that's slowly snuck up on America and then become a front burner issue in the past couple of years because of some global international decisions that were made over in China. So hopefully we'll send you on your way today a little smarter on the topic, and look forward to any Q&A on the back end as we go. All right?
So I prepared a few questions, a little louder. And these are questions that I've heard over the years, and I'm going to ask Richard a few questions, and then he'll explain what his thoughts are on those, and we'll go forward. And then at the end, any questions in the audience, I'll come out and you can do a little bit of Q&A. So, Richard, what trends have you seen to materials over the past decade? And please explain the steady decline in the commodity markets.
Yeah, so I mentioned that this set of issues had started presenting themselves really over about a decade of time. There's been some steady changes that have happened in America with regard to material and what people are trying to recycle that we didn't do a good job, to be frank, between cities and companies in the industry in keeping people informed. You know, I start with something mainstream. When I grew up, one of the cornerstones of recycling in this country was newspapers. You know, I used to tie a little string around them, take them out to the curb, and the reality was that how many folks in this room have an iPad? Pretty much everybody, right? Anybody know when the iPad came out? Almost 10 years ago, around 2008. Think about that. The average span of a contract partnership that we would have with a city is 7 years in this country. In less time than that, an entire industry was disrupted. Newsprint is all but gone in this country. I'm still vintage. I still get a newspaper on Saturday morning. I still sit with my coffee. I'm like, one of the lone wolves left on my street. But we're still paying for equipment in our recycling centers to seek and extract newsprint on a 10-year capital write-down. And there's really only 2 mills left in North America that create newsprint, and they're both up in Canada. So, you have this huge disruption between the investments that are being made and what's happening, what's actually being put in the stream. Digital and the iPad has completely disrupted that. Next one is a really interesting example in terms of material and what's recyclable. The Tide bottle, we use it at our house. That big Tide jug is an amazing product if you're in the business like we are. It's a heavy material. It's high density polyethylene, HDPE. It rolls off of our equipment. It's easy to separate, and there's a really good market for it. But what Tide has done over time is they've shifted to those pods. And they put those pods not in that beautiful jug. They put it in a different package. The one that's up on the chart there is actually PET. It's the same material that your water bottles are, except it's not a clear plastic. And so it is recyclable, it's PET, but there's nobody out there that wants orange PET except Tide. So I can't sell it. I can't aggregate it into one place, and I can't get a tractor trailer load over to Tide to sell it. So that material comes in to our facilities and it has nowhere to go. And so in that unfortunate situation where there's no market and I have to clear the floor, then that would end up going to the landfill. So I'll let that sink in for a little bit, because that's usually one of those, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Now, that package has iterated again. A lot of what they're doing right now are in like a Ziploc pouch that has those little Tide Pods in it. Well, that's plastic, and it behaves like paper in the machines. So it ends up in a bale of mixed paper, which ends up degrading the value of that bale. So some of those decisions that are being made on the manufacturing front, they're for good reason. That's almost a whole other lunch conversation on packaging decisions, but they present challenges to us, real cost and operational challenges. The next one is water bottle. How many folks would agree that a water bottle today barely stands up on the desk? Right? So that's an engineering and a business decision. They've taken all of the material out of that water bottle to the point that in a tractor trailer, if you put one more case on the top, the bottom would rupture. So that's a design that they've taken as much out of it as they can. The reality is, to us, it's still a water bottle. Okay, it's still a transaction. So we have to separate and aggregate twice as many water bottles, because they're about half the weight today, in order to get to a ton of material, because in the industry everything's transacted by the ton. So I have to work twice as hard, run the equipment twice as long to get that same cube of plastic to then take to the market, which turns into a big operational challenge. And then the bottom of this chart is, there are a couple of graphs, and all you need to focus on is the fact that the lines are going down. Over the past decade, the price on average of commodities in the market was declining. And that meant, back to the water bottle example, that we were working twice as hard to aggregate a ton that's worth, in the case of plastic, it was down 40% over a 10-year period. So all of the economics and all of the trends in the industry were already heading in a really bad place. And we were kicking off a campaign to get in front of our cities around the country and educate people what to do. And then China made some pretty significant decisions when that happened.
We've seen the issues with China and China's sword. Can you give us a brief recap of China's sword for those in attendance today and what that involved?
Sure. So China has an environmental problem, full stop. They have a horrible pollution problem in their country, and they were forced to make a decision to begin to tighten the inbound acceptable materials that were coming into their country. They did this in the beginning of 2017, going into 18. What they said was two key things that impacted us. The first was the acceptable quality of inbound material used to be about 3%. That's what a recycling facility in America is designed, all the equipment and all the capabilities. It generates a product that's got 3% contamination. They lowered that standard to 0.5%. So when you think about a ton of material at 2,000 pounds, you're talking about 100 or 10 pounds of contaminants that are in that whole cube. That's impossible to meet from a capability of anybody in the industry in America. And then on top of that, in mixed paper, they stopped 100% of import of mixed paper. So think about all your bills, all your mail, everything else. Now China was consuming 40% of the volume in this country. 40% of the recyclables in the entire nation were going on ships back to China to be consumed into mills and turned into new product. And the reason for that is those ships they all had to go home anyway. They were bringing all these product to our shores, and all those container ships and all the containers were going to go home empty. So it might be really shocking to realize I could ship a container of recyclable material from the port in Long Beach outside of LA to China for less money than it would have cost me to truck it to San Diego, because the ship was already going there. And so it literally was just the cost of paperwork. So when these things took effect, what's called China's sword, the volume in the world stopped going to China. And that set off this chain reaction of logistics and costs, because the material has to find a home. It has to go somewhere, because tomorrow the trucks are going to run in your neighborhoods. And so that's really kind of thrown a huge wrench on things as we talk about the rest of today.
So as we talk about the shift in commodities in the markets due to China and how they impacted, can you tell us you could show us on this graph how we have had to shift from 17 to 18 on where we ship out to Malaysia, but what's the supply and demand impact that we've seen?
Yeah, so it's an eye chart, but it's a really interesting one. It was put together by a third party. The National League of Cities, I think, put this one out, it was in the Financial Times, actually. The left-hand chart looks at 2017, and what I want you to focus on is the left of that are countries and the material, this happens to be plastics, and it's moving to the right-hand side of the chart. And you see kind of the bluish band up at the top, the huge chunks of all those streams coming together. That's China and Hong Kong in 2017. And when you look at what happened to it on the next chart, which is 2018, last year, it all stopped. Now, the total size or the stack height of that is smaller. So some material is not going to overseas ports. But for the most part, China has all but stopped taking volume. The only volume that goes into China today comes out of high grade, like publishing mills. You think high grade magazine paper and things like that. They'll still consume that. But residential grade commodities is gone. Now, if you fast forward to today, these charts I'm briefing you were put together in January in the first quarter. The largest band on the right in kind of a yellowish green is Malaysia. And if you're reading the news right now, Malaysia's closing their ports because they weren't ready to take the world's volume either. And so what that does is it creates this huge supply and demand imbalance in the nation, or actually in the whole global economy. So when we look at something like the value of the material, the left-hand kind of stack of information on this chart, that's the material that comes out of our recycling centers. Things like metals, paper, cardboard, as well as kind of wood and food and other material. In 2017, 65% of what we would process out of our MRF, like the Plano MRF down the street, 65% had a positive value, which meant someone would buy it for a value greater than zero on the market. When you introduce a supply and demand normal economic theory, like we've seen now with the China closing its borders, the right-hand chart, only 35% of the material that we processed in 2018 had positive value. So that means I had to pay to get rid of that bale. I had to pay someone to take it off my hands, where a year ago they may have paid me $100 a ton. So mixed paper is a great example. It used to be about $100, $120 for a ton of mixed paper. Today it runs around minus 15. Okay, so that's $120 swing in the 7-year average contract that I have to process recyclables in 1,100 cities around this country. That's an economic crisis. That's a real problem in terms of being able to be sustainable and durable as we go forward. Now again, this chart on the right-hand side, the only two things that are above the line were old corrugated cardboard, think about your Amazon boxes, and aluminum and metal. And today, you fast forward from January to now, old corrugated cardboard is at an all-time low. In the history that we've tracked the value of it over 17 years, it's the lowest it's ever been, and we do not yet see that turning. So pretty much everything that we're moving goes to beneficial reuse, but we have to pay to move it. And we have a little more clout because we're a large company. You read all the time about small, mid-sized processors. They're all shuttering their doors because they don't have the buying leverage or the selling leverage that we have and the partnerships around the world. So they can't get rid of their material. So they're having to close, and so that's causing a real strain on the programs around the country.
Okay. So Richard, with the increased cost in processing, commodity and residual trends, can you explain the effect at the curb or per home from them being back around year 2000, 2005 to now?
Yeah, so bear with me here. I'm going to walk you through some pretty deep detail around why a recycling program worked and why or how great the challenge is on average in the country. These are average numbers across my portfolio in the 42 states that we serve. So when you think about when recycling started in the country, call it early 90s, when everybody started to step into their programs. Okay, we consciously, in partnership with our cities, we didn't want a barrier to adoption. So on average, we were charging roughly $2 a home in the country. Now, if you compare that for a second to your solid waste, on average, solid waste in the country somewhere at that time was around 12 bucks a home. Okay, same truck, same house, same route. It's just picking up a different material on a different day. And so the solid waste was set up properly at somewhere around $10, $12 on an average back then. But we consciously had a very low value to it, and I'll walk you through why that was. In the processing facilities, in order to run the equipment, pay the staff, pay down the capital, it was somewhere around $60 a ton. The commodity value of what we could sell was awesome. It was about $200 a ton in average, in aggregate, of all the things that we sold, because we focused on a fewer short list of things back then. It was metal, it was aluminum, glass, paper, cardboard. It was the mainstays that all of us remember. Today, you know, we'll talk about what today's material lists look like, but that value at 200 bucks a ton was great, and we had a pretty low level of what we call residual. That's stuff that comes in on the truck that shouldn't have been there, or it doesn't have a market, back to the example in the tide discussion on my first chart. So we will always have trucks that have to take residual or contaminants to the landfill, and that was around 25 bucks a ton. So if I convert that into real numbers per house, recycling in the country started because it worked. But the reason it worked is because we had enough value in the market to then pay for all the operations, because we weren't charging the resident what the real service was set up to be. You look today, you fast forward to today, we haven't changed the price of the curb much. National average is about $3 compared to $15 for solid waste nationwide. The cost to run a modern day recycling center is over $100. The Plano MRF that's down the street, truth is the folks that build and specialize in the equipment that's in that building, they tell us they believe it's the most advanced and sophisticated facility in the world, right down the street from you. So we're very proud to open that in the past couple of months, but the cost to run that thing are significant compared to the past. The value of commodities is half, and again, this is a dated chart from January. I'd say that that's probably down in the $80 range now, so it continues to get lower. And then a third of every truck that comes into our facility nationwide is garbage. We've completely lost our way in understanding what to recycle and how to do it properly as a nation. So every 3 trucks, I have 1 aggregated truck that is trash. And the cost to dispose of it has gone up to about $50. So that translates into a net gap, an economic headwind, if you're in the business, of about $5.50 per home per month across the country. That's the size of the challenge that we've got, because the contracts in America weren't set up to stand on their own as a service. Okay?
And you know, it's funny because there was a study done, and I'll forget where it was at, but they asked folks, if you have something in your hand and you think it's recyclable, will you put it in the trash or will you put it in recyclable? And over 65% said recyclable. Now, you'd be shocked, but I'm telling you right now, we see dirty diapers in the recyclables, garden hoses, people think they're recyclable, pizza boxes with grease all over them, none of that is. And we'll talk about education here a little bit that we're going to get into, but it's amazing because people automatically put it in recyclable thinking it's recyclable, and that adds to the contamination, which is over 30% now. So this next question is a 2-part question, Richard. What do you see as a durable recycling model for the future? And the second portion of it is, do you feel that the consumer is willing to pay?
So my team is engaging all of our 1,100 partners around the country. We've been doing that pretty steadily since last year. And we continue to do it on a recurring monthly, every other month basis, because things are changing so rapidly. What we're advocating and what we're requesting our partners to do is step back and recast the business model. This isn't just an exercise to say we need more money just to break even. the model doesn't work because it relies on that back-end value of the commodity. And sure, that worked a decade or more ago, but in order for us to move as a country towards zero waste, or to move to a sustainable position in our communities, that container and that route and that truck, that service, if you will, has to stand on its own, or else you're pivoting as a country to a one-legged stool. It just doesn't work. Okay, so what we advocate is actually stepping back and saying, separate the services. We run a collection service, we run trucks, we touch your house, we pick up your material, and we take it somewhere. And then we run a second service in some communities to process that material and turn it into a bale of commodity that goes to market. And so if we could set up our contracts to pay for those two services, then we're insulated as a program from what's happening in the world commodity markets. Now, those commodities and the amount of residual that comes out of the program, those are the two floating numbers that should be, the city should enjoy that value. There will be positive value in it, and if markets continue to improve at some point in the future, that'll only get better for the cities. But that's a complete pivot from all of the industry that touches recyclables in the country. But we believe it's necessary if we truly are going to continue to move to a more sustainable position as we go. Now, in order to help elected officials and cities understand and navigate this, we've surveyed our customers. This is one chart of a pretty extensive survey that we ran with just shy of 3,000 customers coast to coast. Two big takeaways from this. When we asked our customers in residential client bases if they want to recycle, do they value recycling, they said yes. They would prefer to continue to recycle as opposed to seeing their program go away. And then more importantly, when we asked them, do you value recycling? And if so, what value do you place on it? They said 75% of what they pay for their solid waste is the value that they would be willing to pay for their recycling. So if you go back to the $15 analogy, you know, that puts you somewhere in that $10 range, which is, if you go back to the basic math, if the averages are 3 and the gap is 550, you're somewhere in that wheelhouse. So our message to our elected officials and our city staffs as we move around the country is there is a willingness to pay and there is a desire to keep these programs. It's not political suicide if you step into that, because that's the biggest fear that most electeds would have, is if I raise price and I don't have a good explanation for it, I'm going to get voted out. And so that's one of the biggest things that we're working with our partners on.
So as an industry leader, as Republic Services is, what have you done or what have we done to help inform and educate the public to the growing issues?
So a couple things. Media and media attention on the story. This is a newsworthy story on a global scale as well as down to a local scale. We began to engage and respond to requests from media. Everything from small local newspapers up through the major publications, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, The Guardian and others, as well as major networks. We've been on the Today Show, we've been on CNN, we've been on Bloomberg. We're telling that story and we're sharing that information about what's changed in the world so that we can give kind of that top cover. America needs to hear what's happening so that they understand and have a choice and they can voice that to their councils and electeds. Again, data chart, January, after 6 months of a campaign, we had over 1 billion impressions, which meant folks were reading and consuming. That's now over 2 billion in the trailing 6 months that have occurred since January. And then we've also invested significantly as a company to create a public education campaign. So if you were to go on the web today to recyclingsimplified.com, you would see the classic do's and don'ts, what to recycle and how to do it properly, and the various campaigns that go with that. But we've also created a huge trove of materials that we set free on that website for cities, regardless of whether or not we partner with them, to consume, brand, and put out into the community. everything from hangers that go on the container to door tags to bill stuffers to billboards, you name it, it's all out there. And that's, you know, a continued investment that we're going to make and put out to try and help with spreading the word and getting people to understand what to do. Okay?
And local reassess materials and recycling programs and get away from the just simply diversion material.
Yeah, so I'll go back a little bit to my comment about weight. This industry is completely centered on measurement of weight in terms of what's being recycled, what's sold, and diversion, right? The whole goal of recycling is to find material that could be beneficially reused, extract it from the landfill stream, and put it to good use. But the problem around the country, especially candidly, if I look on the West Coast, they have ordinances and laws on the books that mandate that they're going to get to 50 or 60 or 70% diversion over a short period of time. So that creates a behavior to recycle anything, regardless of whether it's the right thing. That's how we end up with, you know, bowling balls and pots and pans and, you know, things that are heavy end up in the program, and people confuse that we're a thrift store instead of an organization that's built for high volume and speed of processing of a truckload of material that comes out of the neighborhood. So, you know, even things like glass, you know, glass is a huge hot topic because it was a cornerstone of the original programs that everyone started with. The reality is that glass is the heaviest single material that we collect and process, and it's just sand at the end of the day. It's silicon and sand. And if there is not a buyer within about 300 miles of your recycling facility, the economics of moving that heavy material in a tractor trailer over the roads, the economics fall apart. And the material has no beneficial value by the time you get it to the buyer. Not to mention all the carbon that you're burning in those tractor trailers running over the roads. So the whole logic falls apart at about 300 miles. Now here in your community, your glass has a local partner in the ecosystem, Midlothian. And so it finds a consumer, so it works here. It works in St. Louis, where a lot of the glass goes into craft beer and fiberglass with Owens Corning. It works in Northern California because of the wine industry and consuming all of it to turn it back into Gallo. You know, we call it Gallo glass, so the reason it's green is because it's a whole mix of other glass. But when you look at pockets in this country that don't have that local presence, you really need to step back and decide what should be in your material list so that it's easy, it's appropriate, and it's the right thing for the planet. And that's a significant shift from recycle anything and everything because we're chasing weight, okay? So in terms of key topics going forward, what I would hope that not only folks that are here, but cities and staff think about what's in the recycling programs as we go forward as a country, things that have a more beneficial reuse and a benefit to the planet. We are going to consider different ways to track success. We need to start talking about the things that have a higher CO2 benefit or a carbon benefit rather than just the weight-based elements. Public education, we're going to continue to invest and commit to that, and we hope to be able to partner through our contracts so that we can continue to keep people abreast of what's happening. And then the business model. That candidly, that's going to be the secret to long-term durability in a program. Otherwise, we're constantly going to be trying to offset a portion of the contract that's running underwater with other portions of the contract that are not. And that just doesn't make sense when that is the future service that we're trying to set up. So with that, I think we're going to open it up for a little
Yeah,
dialogue.
we'll open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions, raise your hands. I'll come out. First and foremost, I'd like to take the time to say thank you to Richard for taking the bus stop trip to Rockwall when he jumped off the plane and be safe on your way to Atlanta. It really does show the leadership that we have as an organization when one of our, as we call it, top brass decide to get off a plane, come to great Rockwall, Texas, give a quick presentation, but we do appreciate you. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
So anybody have any questions? I'm old, so it's going to take a while.
With this weather issues that we've had, all the tornadoes, flooding, things like that, does that affect new services that y'all offer?
It can, but first I want to make it clear that storm debris that comes from a classic storm event or a crisis event, that's handled separately from the classic solid waste and recycling operation. A lot of times what we will do after we have a whole protocol of protecting our people and our assets, because you need those trucks to be functioning the day after. But we will classically stop service, say the recycling service, we may pause that to let the community kind of get their feet under them. And because we know that if we have those containers out, they're just going to be filled with debris anyway, and then we have to deal with that in the facility, and the equipment's not set for that. So our typical behavior that you would see is where we'll pause recycling, focus on solid waste, but also work with the storm debris companies and the FEMA process to get as much of that material off the curb as we can, and then step back into normalcy. But those events, they also lead to a lot of heavy, wet material, and that's also something that we've got to take into account through our operation as well. Okay. Good question.
All right, you and then you.
You got to move with purpose, Marine.
I'm old, this is all the purpose I got.
Do you see the general trend in pricing and costs stabilizing over the next 4 years, or do you think the trend of the past 9 years will continue to keep going?
Yeah, two factors happening there. Absent the disruption in supply and demand with China's sword, I'll take that second. The trend of commodities was tracking almost identically to the cost of oil, West Texas crude. You could overlay those two graphs over the past 10, 15 years, and the correlation was uncanny. And that's because of the tie to resins and other aspects of the material and the plastics. Now, when you introduce a global disruption like China stepping out, that kind of flips the table over. You can't really predict well where you're going to get to the bottom and where you're going to get to stability, because you still have other countries that weren't prepared for the flood of material, like Malaysia. I don't think we're anywhere near seeing stability of that. Now, the flip side of that is we have countries that are starting to come here and buy old mills and turn them back up online. That's going to give us some local domestic capacity. Now here, all of your material that goes through our Plano facility is consumed domestically. None of it goes offshore, even to those backup ports. But over maybe a 2-year horizon, China has come in here and started buying some mills. It'll take a couple years to get them back up and functioning, and they'll start to consume, and we'll see some stabilization of prices there. But even if that continued, it won't displace the 40% volume that we used to send over there to China. There's just not enough mills in play right now to fill that hole. So I think we're going to continue to see some really down value markets for the foreseeable future, being years and going forward.
Richard, first of all, thank you very much for being here on behalf of the board. I just want to personally thank you. It's been a great presentation. I'm curious as to why the shift in demand for the end recyclable material. What is it, a price model? Is it, can I go out and produce the materials cheaper raw than actually taking the recyclable? That's one question. Then I'm going to take the advantage of the mic and ask you too.
You have a 4-part question?
Yeah, that's right. As far as, there's been a lot of talk of the planet and the greenhouse effect and so on, and carbon tax being thrown around, and different solutions in the political environment. How deep is Republic's participation in those conversations?
Okay, so first question with regard to kind of the decision point or some of the trade-offs that happen. I'll use glass just because the analogy or the story kind of resonates with people. Picture yourself as a plant manager of a glass plant, and your job is to produce glass jars or bottles. Okay, your bonus and your standing as an employee, as a plant manager, is more than likely going to be predicated on speed and quality, right? You're turning out good quality glass bottles. And right now, the value of virgin glass is lower than recycled glass. And so as a plant manager, your easy decision is to go with virgin glass because it's going to be pure and it's going to yield a better outcome and you're going to have a better shot at your bonus. And so that when you hit that intersection of parity between the virgin material and the recycled material, that's where things get really difficult, because now you're into the goodwill, the willingness to do the right thing, even though the economics don't hold up. And so that's what we're seeing in a lot of cases in those commodity markets. Your second question in terms of our engagement, our commitment to dialogue and conversations that kind of help advance, we are very engaged. I'd say everywhere from high level federal government like EPA roundtables and dialogue as a subject expert on our little niche of the world. And then we're also sitting at the table with like packaging councils and major manufacturers to try and help them understand what the end of their decision would look like. Even though the decision that they might be making for a particular package makes good sense from an environmental perspective in the life cycle, the end of the line when it comes to us may not be recyclable. And that's a hard thing for people to get their head around, that if you step back and look at the totality of what they're doing, it does make sense. So we try and have a lot of conversations and a lot of input to the right forums, but it's a pretty complicated dance, to be very honest. But we're happy to be in the dialogue.
One more question, then we're out of time.
Okay.
From listening to you, it sounds to me like a lot of it is an education issue for the public. And so I've always learned the fact that I learn the most from my mistakes more than I do from everything that I've done correctly. So have you considered the idea of maybe educating the people that pick up my recyclables? And even if they were to put back 20% of my stuff, hey, your Tide Pods and your greasy pizza boxes and your things like that, and leave them in my bin, wouldn't that then translate over all the millions of homes you're doing to helping you with the cost, as well as also educating me to say, I shouldn't put this in the bins?
Yeah, so a couple of really good questions and comments there. Public education is a huge piece of this. Helping people understand what to do and how to do it properly, giving them feedback. So part of that material that we are putting out on the website for everyone to consume are little, we call them oops tags, so that if somebody makes an error, you can leave that on their container and annotate something. But think about that for a second. Our drivers will touch somewhere between 800 and 1,000 homes in a day on their route, moving at speed. So if they were to stop, inspect, write a tag, tie it on, and then get back in the cab of the truck, they wouldn't come close to even a quarter of that route. So the economics of the route of running the operation make that very difficult. Now, yes, we can send some chase trucks out and do some small samples, and we're actually running some really good pilots right now to figure out what works best for doing that. But if you think back to that chart of all the dollars that I gave you, even when a community has 0% contamination and it's pure, the commodity value won't cover the operation. We have to reset the programs in America, and the residents are going to have to pay for that service in order for it to be durable in the long term. Okay?
Richard, I'm Jim Pruitt. I'm mayor of the city of Rockwall. We've met previously at a couple of places, but I just want to tell you, Rick knows all my theory about recycling and stuff, that people want it, they ought to pay for it, but we'll get there sometime with these contracts. But on a personal note, this week in our city, someone was injured very badly on John King. She was injured to the point of having breaks in 4 or 5 places. Your employees stopped their truck, went and treated the woman, stabilized her, moved her out of the road until the EMS people would come do it. But that's the kind of employees that y'all have in our community, and we thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I really do genuinely appreciate that feedback. Our drivers love what they do. They love serving you all, and it's genuine. They really get up every day and are happy to work with you. And on behalf of my team, I want to thank you for the chance to share a little bit of our story today. And I wish you all the best as you go forward, and hopefully I'll get a chance to come back and tell you things are much better. Take care.
Well, Mayor, we can't top that. That was terrific, and I can't thank you, Rick Burness, for helping us get such a great leader out here to talk to us about this. This is quite an educational session and topic. We just don't know enough, and I love the www.recyclingsimplified.com. That is great. So please, everybody, take a moment to go do that. Thank you all for coming. It was so terrific, and I thank the team also for making an effort to be here. I know you're on your way, Richard, to Atlanta, but thanks again for being here. Well, if you want a good realtor, just let me know. Gotta have that plug, right? So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being great leaders in our community, and thank you for supporting the chamber. Thank you so much. Have a great day. It is a great day. Thank you again.
Great day to be on. Great day.